But I want to talk about an even more insidious, annoying feature that's related to this, that I think affects you guys even more than this hedonic adaptation, which is what I'll call annoying feature 4, which is that in addition to having hedonic adaptation, we also don't realize that we're going to have hedonic adaptation. We don't realize that our minds get used to this stuff. And this is a particular thing that messes up our predictions, because we think the happy things that we seek out are going to make us happy for a long time. And maybe even more insidious, we don't realize that if bad things happen, we're just not going to be that affected by them very soon. And so we go back to our cat example, and the reason I chose this meme, in addition to the fact that it's funny because it has a cat and lots of hot dogs and whatever, is the bottom part where he's like, I believe I am going to enjoy this. Like, this cat really believes that if he continues eating hot dogs 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, that the 6th and 7th hot dog is going to give him as much happiness as that first one. And I think it's funny, the cat, but we all have a little bit of the cat in us, where we think these things that we buy, we think when we buy the new iPhone, we think when we get into this new relationship, we think when we get into Yale, that we're going to maintain that same level of happiness, but we're just not. This is an illusion. And it's an illusion not just for this cat and his hot dogs, it's an illusion for when we think, oh, we're going to get the perfect job that we really love, or we're going to get this awesome stuff, or we're going to get in this awesome marriage, or we're going to get into Yale. Like, we think this is going to be there, but it's not. And if we realize that, we might be a lot happier. And so there's a word for this that Dan Gilbert and his colleagues came up with. They call this bias the impact bias. And this is the idea that we tend to overestimate the emotional impact of things in two ways, both in terms of their intensity and in terms of their duration. We think they're going to be better than they're going to be at the moment we get it, and we think that it's going to last longer than it really does. You saw one of these, the intensity part, in the context of a study that I'm going to say one more time because it's so important to remind you guys of. It has to do with grades. Remember this study about predicting how badly or happy you're going to feel if you get a grade that's better or worse than you expect? So if you get a grade that's higher or lower than you expect, how will you feel on this 9-point scale? Here's what students actually predict. If it's higher than expect on a 9-point scale, you're going to be at an 8. If it's what you expect, you're going to be like almost 8. But if it's worse than you expect, boom, you're going to drop all the way down to a 4.4. What is it really? It's basically exactly the same the whole way down. It's like not really different than you like really care about, right? And so why am I telling you that? This is the case where we're mispredicting the intensity of our own reactions. We predict that we're going to be super happy if we get a grade that's higher than we expect. Even worse, we predict we're going to be really, really depressed and really sad if we get a grade that is worse than we expect. But in practice, we're just not that messed up. We also are messed up in terms of mispredicting the duration. We think that events are going to last, they're going to affect us way longer than they actually do. And this prevents us from taking certain actions in the world that would make us happy or not, or maybe be risky, there might be a bad outcome. I think it's going to affect us a lot and for a long time, but it kind of just doesn't. And so here's another example that's close to home, sort of, because it involves residential colleges, but it's residential colleges not here at Yale, it's at that other school at Harvard. Some of you may know that at Harvard, or at least at the time this study was run, you find out which residential college you're in during your freshman year. So you just learn, like, you're in this residential college. They don't know when they first get there, at least at the time of the study. And what they asked is, you know, you're going to find out tomorrow that you're in like either a super good residential college, like Adams House, which is the best house on Harvard's campus, or you're like in a super crappy one, like you're like in Mather, or like you're quadded, which is like the terrible thing at Harvard, right? And they asked, like, how are you going to feel? In fact, how are you going to feel 1 year later? Like a year later, you're stuck in this crappy residential college. How bad is that going to be? And they have people predict. They predict on a 7-point scale. And what do you find? Well, here's the graph of what people predict. So they predict if I'm in the Silliman at Harvard, which is the best residential college, obviously, then it's going to be awesome. Like on my 7-point rating scale, a year from now, I'm going to be a 6 because it's going to be awesome. If I'm in, you know, Franklin or like Stiles or whatever, one of the not so good colleges, then my happiness is going to like, you know, it's going to be half of what it could have been, right? What is it actually a year on? It's indistinguishable, right? We think these things are going to last forever. Probably at the moment you find out you got in a crappy one, you're kind of like, that's a little crappy. But like after that moment, everything else takes over. Okay? And this graph is awesome because I think it shows one of the things I worry most about our misprediction, which is that, yeah, we have this impact bias for positive things. We predict it's going to be awesome, and it's not as awesome as we expect, but we have way more of an impact bias for negative things. We think this is going to destroy our lives to be in this crappy residential college. We'll only be at half our happiness potential, but like it just doesn't nearly do it as much as we think. The impact bias we have for negative predictions is much worse than we think. And so just to give you a couple extreme examples, one of the spots where researchers have looked at this, I think because researchers care a lot about this being academics, is our predictions about getting tenure, right? So as you know, most of the junior faculty here will find out if they get tenure. Some will get tenure and then they have a job forever. Others will be denied tenure and they predict that their whole life will be over. They have to leave Yale, find a new job, et cetera. And so Gilbert and colleagues actually asked professors to predict how happy are you going to feel if you get tenure and how sad are you going to feel if you don't get it. And so here's what they find. You get tenure, you predict, I'm going to be super happy. You don't get it, you're like, oh, this is going to be terrible. What do you actually find? It's just like you guys with grades. You're like slightly over predicting for how happy you're going to be if you get it, but you're really under predicting how happy you're going to be when you're denied. It's just not as bad as you think, right? Maybe you guys can't relate to getting tenure, so here's another example that might be more salient to you. What if you go through a horrible breakup? You really thought you were going to be with this person for a long time, but you break up in a long-term relationship. You're both predicting something about the intensity of how bad this is going to be and its duration. Are you right? Paul Eastwick and colleagues looked at this, and it turns out you're wrong. Here's your prediction of distress, so bigger bars are more unhappiness. Here's what it actually is. Like basically at every point, if I ask you, how about 6 weeks in? How about 10 weeks in? You're just off in your predictions. You're just way better. You're way happier than you expect, even with this negative event. How about a really extreme negative event that you might think? So you go in for a routine test at DUH, you decide to get an STD test, and you find out that you are HIV positive. Like, this is something that you might all predict is going to really mess up your life and decrease your happiness for a long time, right? Here we have some famous examples of this. We have Charlie Sheen, who found out he was HIV positive, and I love this next headline, like from 11 months later. He says that how he's doing excellent. It's like he's having the best time of his life, even though he's HIV positive. You might think that's just because Charlie Sheen's like a little bit off, like normal people would be really messed up by this. But what is it really? Well, Seif and colleagues actually did this. They actually looked at people's predictions of their HIV test results and what people actually feel at the moment they get the HIV test results. And so you predict before and after. Here's the predicted for a negative result. I think this is around out of 100, basically on the scale they use. So you predict like you're going to be pretty, mid-range happy if you get this. And it's distress, so bigger numbers are worse. And you predict that if you get a positive result, you're pretty much at like max distress possible of finding out you're HIV positive, right? What are the actual results? Well, they're less good than you think, and they're way less bad than you think. I mean, this isn't like the best day of your life when you find out you're HIV positive, but it's not nearly as bad as we think. And in fact, this is just the moment that you find out. If you look a year later, the results even out even a bit more, right? So even the most horrible things, we are not good at predicting. And you might say, maybe this is just because we don't get to do this all the time. Like if you think about the worst things in your life, your breakups or finding out you're HIV positive or something, it doesn't happen that much that these horrible things happen to us. So maybe we don't predict well because we just like don't have that much experience with it. Maybe if we had more experience with horrible things happening to us, we'd be like, when horrible things happen to me, they ain't so bad. And so Aiden and colleagues actually did a cool thing. They found this strange case where horrible things happen and they might repeat happen to try to see, do people get better at reducing their impact bias over time? And they looked at teens like facing a driver's exam, because as you know, some of you may have had, I had this experience too where I failed once, where like you can sometimes fail multiple times in a row before you get it. And so you're predicting like how happy am I going to be if I pass, but you might have had the experience of predicting you're going to be really upset if you fail, and then you fail and you weren't that upset. Maybe you update over time. And so that's what they did. They actually looked at teens' forecasts of how happy they're going to be if they fail the driver exam. And if they fail multiple times, are they more accurate as they fail more and more? And so here's the graph of predicted and actual happiness. And you're seeing basically what we've seen on a million other graphs, which is that people are predicting that they're going to be really low on happiness, but their actual happiness is really high. But that's if you've never had a previous test before. That's your classic impact bias. Question is, does the impact bias get lessened if you've failed a number of times before and had the experience? The answer is no. Every single time you fail, you still mispredict the next time, that you're like, this time I'm still going to be really upset if I fail, and you're just not. We don't get better at impact bias as we get more experience with it, which is kind of sad. And so there's this question about, okay, we're not getting better at it, but like, why are we so bad at this? Like, what is messing us up? Why can't we see how resilient we're really gonna be? And again, we have Dan Gilbert and colleagues who came up with these like fantastic psychological biases that he talks about. And these are pretty profound, and they're ones that you can actually work on to get rid of these biases. The first of these is what he calls focalism. And this is the idea that when we think about our predictions about an event, we tend to think about just one thing about those events, forgetting everything else that could happen in our lives, right? So let's take an example. Like tomorrow you get a DUH, you do your routine STD test, and you find out you're HIV positive. And you're like, everything in my life is gonna stop. And I say, a year from now, how are you gonna feel? You're like, what are you focusing on? You're like, I am HIV positive. That is the thing you're focusing on. Everything in my life is gonna stop. But a year from now, what's really happening to you? Like, you're going to classes, you're like hanging out, you're thinking about summer jobs, you're like, eating really good cupcakes in the dining hall. Like, your life is filled with all this stuff that's not your HIV status, right? It's just not gonna mess you up as much as you think. This is focalism. We focus on this one thing, we ignore all this other stuff. And this is the misprediction. This is what focalism is. When you focus on the one thing, you mispredict. And so when you're predicting about your own happiness levels, like if you get a job or you do something, think not just about that moment, but think about the stuff surrounding it. Like, okay, that's how happy you're gonna be if you get this internship you really want this summer, but what else is gonna happen around it? Like, there's still gonna be rainy days, there's still gonna be all this stuff. Same thing with the bad stuff. If you're predicting like how bad you'll feel if you take this class that's kind of risky and you get a bad grade, like, think about the stuff around it. You're gonna have other grades. It's gonna be the summer. Like, you're gonna move off. You're gonna rationalize why you get that bad grade, all this stuff, right? And that last part about rationalization gets us to the second bias that causes these mispredictions. And that's what Dan Gilbert calls immune neglect. And this is his idea that we are sometimes unaware of the power of what he calls our psychological immune system. What does he mean by this? He means that we just have this tendency to adapt to and cope with negative events. We're actually just pretty resilient. We're actually a lot more resilient than we like to think sometimes. So the fact of the matter is, like, we actually don't like when sucky things happen to us. Like, our minds don't like to feel really awful, and we have lots of mechanisms for feeling better when we feel really awful. Like, let's say we have a breakup. Do you just like sit there and bemoan the breakup? No, you have friends who take you out and you go get ice cream, or you like go on the internet and look at pictures of puppies. Like, we are not like trapped in this horrible event that happens. We have lots of resilience to get over things. This is true with bad grades too. Yes, it's a bad grade, but like, you move on, you go out with your friends, you go to like, you're not stuck in this focus. You have mechanisms to make yourself feel better, and you engage in those mechanisms much more so than you realize. And we have a set of powerful ones to get ourselves out of thinking that we are a bad person or things are really awful when bad things happen. We can rationalize, and we give ourselves reasons, and we find meaning. We do all these things because we have a whole suite of psychological traits to force ourselves to feel better. The crazy thing is, we don't realize we have these. We're constantly forgetting how resilient we really, really are. And that means we're mispredicting. And this is why I think this annoying feature is one of the most insidious ones, because it means you guys don't know how powerful and how resilient you are. And this is the thing that worries me most about your generation, which in discussions like this book, Excellent Sheep, and all these things have been talked about in terms of being not very risk-seeking. I think you're scared about negative outcomes and negative feedback, even more, as folks have claimed, than other generations. And this bias is maybe the result of this. You're scared to take on these things, and what we know about you from psychology research is you're just gonna be fine. If you take that risky class and you get a crappy grade, you're gonna have all these mechanisms to not feel as bad for as much bad or as long bad as you think. If you go risky and you try to apply for a risky job and you don't get it, you're just gonna be a lot better than you think. And so this is the bias I worry about most, because it means you're mispredicting your own potential in these ways that are kind of sad.